I thought my life was over when my deadbeat father left me behind as collateral for $1 million debt. I expected a nightmare. But I never expected the bloodthirsty Alpha King to look at me, drop to his knees, and aggressively baby-proof his own torture basement. I thought I was just a civilian made to a monster. Until my hidden biology changed everything. The scent of cheap bleach and old floor wax was the only thing keeping Leo grounded. He kept his head down, knees pressed hard against the cold marble of the foyer, scrubbing a phantom stain for the third time. Leo was a beta. Or, at least, that's what his medical charts had said since he was a teenager. In a world governed by the intense, primal dynamics of alphas and omegas, being a beta was a quiet blessing. He didn't have heats, he didn't drop into helpless ruts, and his scent was nothing more than a faint, clean note of rain on asphalt, practically non-existent. He was supposed to be invisible. He was supposed to live a quiet, boring life working a desk job. Then his father, a chronic gambler with a gift for disappearing, ran up a 7-figure debt with the most ruthless syndicate in the city. And because his father was nowhere to be found, the collection fell to Leo. "You missed a spot, little bird." The voice was like low thunder, vibrating straight through the floorboards and into Leo's chest. Leo froze, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The sheer, suffocating pressure of the pheromones in the room changed instantly. Heavy, dark wood, crushed winter mint, and the sharp, metallic tang of pure power. Nikolai Volkov. The alpha of the Volkov Bratva. Nikolai's polished leather shoes stepped into Leo's narrow field of vision. Leo squeezed his sponge, soapy water dripping over his raw, red knuckles. He had been locked in this estate for 3 weeks, functioning as an unpaid, glorified maid to work off the interest of a debt he could never hope to pay. "I'm sorry, Mr. Volkov," Leo whispered, keeping his eyes glued to the shoes. "I'll clean it again." A heavy, calloused hand suddenly gripped the back of Leo's neck. It wasn't painful, but the absolute dominance behind the touch made Leo's instincts scream. He was forced to tilt his head up, meeting the piercing, icy blue eyes of his captor. Nikolai was towering, his broad shoulders filling out a bespoke charcoal suit, his dark hair dusted with silver at the temples. A faint, jagged scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him the look of a predator who enjoyed the hunt. "Look at me when I speak to you," Nikolai murmured, his thumb brushing against the sensitive skin just below Leo's ear. Nikolai's brow furrowed slightly, his nostrils flaring as he took a deep, sudden breath. "Your scent. It's different today." Leo blinked, his heart hammering against his ribs. I used a different soap. The one from the supply closet." Nikolai's eyes narrowed, tracking the rapid pulse in Leo's throat. For a second, the terrifying alpha looked almost confused, a flicker of something primal passing over his harsh features. But just as quickly, the expression vanished, replaced by his usual cold, mocking mask. "Your father called today," Nikolai said, releasing Leo's neck. The sudden loss of warmth made Leo shiver. "He offered to trade a warehouse in the East District to buy you back. Do you know what I told him?" Leo swallowed hard, shaking his head. "I told him the warehouse was already mine," Nikolai chuckled, a dark, rumbling sound. "And that I quite like having his son on his knees in my house. You're going to be here a very long time, Leo." Nikolai turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him up the grand staircase. Leo collapsed back onto his heels, trembling violently. He pressed a hand to his stomach, which had been feeling strangely tight and nauseous all morning. He blamed it on the stress, the fear, and the cheap bread he'd been eating. He had to survive this. He just had to keep his head down. 2 months passed, and the routine became a numbing rhythm. Leo scrubbed floors, dusted priceless antiquities, and tried his best to blend into the wallpaper. But blending in was becoming impossible. Lately, Nikolai's behavior had shifted. The brutal, bloodthirsty alpha who routinely ordered executions from his study was spending an unsettling amount of time watching Leo. Whenever Leo served his coffee or cleaned his office, Nikolai's gaze would track him like a hawk profiling its prey. Even worse, Leo's body was betraying him. He felt constantly exhausted, his sense of smell had become dizzyingly sharp, and the scent of Nikolai's winter mint, which used to terrify him, now made his mouth water in a way that felt deeply shameful. It reached a breaking point on a rainy Tuesday winter night. Nikolai had returned late from a negotiation, the faint scent of copper and gunpowder clinging to his clothes. He ordered Leo to bring a bottle of high-end vodka to his private lounge, a dark, leather-bound room that smelled heavily of the alpha. When Leo entered, carrying the crystal tray, he found Nikolai sitting on the sofa, his tie loosened, looking exhausted and lethally handsome. "Pour a glass for yourself, Leo," Nikolai ordered, not looking up from his paperwork. Leo paused. "Sir, I'm on duty. And I don't really drink." "It's an order," Nikolai growled softly. Leo swallowed his protests. He poured 2 glasses, his hands shaking slightly. He handed one to Nikolai, carefully avoiding finger contact, but Nikolai grabbed his wrist, pulling him closer until Leo was standing right between the alpha's parted knees. "You look pale," Nikolai murmured, his blue eyes raking over Leo's face. "Are my men not feeding you?" "They are," Leo lied. The truth was, almost all food made him violently ill lately. "Drink," Nikolai commanded, raising his own glass. "To debts that can never be paid." Nikolai downed his shot. Leo, desperate to appease the man, swallowed his own. The alcohol burned like liquid fire hitting his empty stomach. He gasped, coughing slightly, his face flushing. Nikolai watched him, a strange, dark intensity in his eyes. Another. 1 glass turned into 3. For a beta with 0 tolerance, the world quickly began to spin in a warm, hazy blur. The fear that usually kept Leo stiff and guarded began to melt away. He found himself sitting on the edge of the coffee table, looking at Nikolai, his defenses completely down. "Why do you keep me here?" Leo asked, his voice slurred, a brave front masking his vulnerability. "You know my dad doesn't care about me. Keeping me doesn't punish him. It just hurts me." Nikolai leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Leo. "You think I keep you here because of your father?" Nikolai's voice dropped to a rough whisper. He reached out, his large hand cupping Leo's jaw, his thumb wiping away a stray drop of vodka from Leo's lip. "You are the only quiet thing in my life, Leo. And I am a selfish man." The proximity was intoxicating. The wintermint scent was overwhelming, flooding Leo's senses, triggering a deep, aching void low in his belly. Before Leo could process what he was doing, he leaned into the touch, whining softly, a sound a beta should never be able to make. Nikolai froze, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. An alpha's response to a call. "Leo," Nikolai growled, his voice thick with sudden, unbridled lust. "What are you doing to me?" "Please," Leo whispered, not even knowing what he was begging for. Nikolai didn't ask twice. He pulled Leo into his lap, his mouth crashing down onto Leo's in a bruising, possessive kiss. It was rough, primal, and entirely devoid of the gentleness Leo had never known. Leo gasped into the kiss, his hands gripping Nikolai's broad shoulders as the alpha's scent washed over him like a tidal wave, drowning out every lick of common sense. That night, on the leather sofa, the boundaries of captor and captive blurred into a feverish, chaotic haze of heat and friction. Leo didn't understand why his body was aching for an alpha's knot, or why his own biology was screaming in compliance. He only knew that in Nikolai's arms, for the first time in his life, he felt entirely consumed. The morning sun cut through the heavy velvet curtains like a blade. Leo woke up with a pounding headache and a deep, systemic ache that made it difficult to move. The dark leather sofa was empty, but the distinct scent of Nikolai, winter mint and heavy wood, was woven into the very fabric of Leo's clothes. Reality crashed over him with the force of a physical blow. He scrambled off the couch, his knees shaking so violently he had to catch himself on the armrest. He looked down at his disheveled clothes, the marks on his skin, and the crushing weight of shame settled into his chest. He was a captive. A beta. And he had just slept with the man holding him hostage. Panic, sharp and cold, took over. Leo practically fled the private lounge, stumbling down the servants' corridor to his tiny, windowless room in the basement. He stripped out of his clothes, scrubbing himself under the freezing spray of the shower until his skin was raw. He needed to wash away the scent, the memory, the terrifying realization that a part of him had wanted it. When he finally emerged, dressed in a fresh, oversized maid's uniform, his stomach gave a violent heave. He barely made it to the toilet before dry heaving, his body racked by a sudden, intense nausea that left him breathless and crying on the cold tile floor. "Get up, little bird. The boss wants his breakfast." Leo flinched. One of Nikolai's enforcers, a hulking alpha named Dmitri, was knocking loudly on his door. "I'm coming," Leo called out, his voice cracking. He wiped his mouth, swallowed down the lingering bile, and forced himself to stand. When Leo entered the grand dining room 20 minutes later carrying a tray of black coffee and soft-boiled eggs, Nikolai was already there. The alpha was reading a ledger, looking entirely untouched by the chaotic passion of the night before. He looked crisp, lethal, and perfectly composed. Leo's hands trembled as he set the coffee down. He tried to keep his face completely blank, to act like a mindless servant, but as he reached across the table, Nikolai's hand shot out. Nikolai gripped Leo's wrist. His touch wasn't painful, but it was unyielding. The alpha didn't look up from his ledger immediately, but his nostrils flared, taking in a sharp, deep breath. "You smell of soap," Nikolai said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Where is my scent, Leo?" I washed, sir," Leo whispered, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. "I had to get ready for work." Nikolai finally looked up. His blue eyes were piercing, dark with a possessive irritation that made Leo's pulse spike. "Do not wash away what belongs to me again." Nikolai released his wrist, his gaze lingering on the pale skin where his fingers had just been. "Sit down." "Sir." "Sit. And eat," Nikolai commanded, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You look like a stiff breeze could blow you over." "I don't keep broken tools in my house." Leo wanted to refuse, but the sheer command in the alpha's voice brooked no argument. He sat on the very edge of the chair, picking up a piece of dry toast with trembling fingers. The smell of the eggs across the table suddenly hit him like a physical wall. His stomach churned violently. Leo slapped a hand over his mouth, gasped, and bolted from the room before Nikolai could even shout his name. For the next 2 weeks, the tension in the Volkov estate was thick enough to cut with a knife. Leo did everything he could to avoid the alpha, practically burying himself in the deepest, oldest parts of the mansion. Which was how he ended up cleaning the basement wine cellar and the adjoining interrogation vault. It was a grim, terrifying place, concrete floors with built-in drains, heavy iron chains hanging from the ceiling, and walls insulated to deaden sound. It was the physical manifestation of who Nikolai Volkov truly was, a monster. Leo scrubbed the iron grates, tears of exhaustion blurring his vision. His body felt heavier every day. His breasts felt tender and swollen, his lower abdomen carried a strange, constant warmth, and the morning sickness had turned into an all-day ordeal. "I'm just sick," Leo told himself desperately, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's just the stress. Betas don't get, they can't." The heavy steel door to the basement groaned open. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed down the stone steps. Leo froze, his heart dropping into his stomach. Nikolai stepped into the dim light of the vault, his coat draped over one arm, his sleeves rolled up to reveal thick, scarred forearms. He looked around the grim room, then his eyes locked onto Leo, who was huddled near the drain with a bucket of bleach. "You're working too hard," Nikolai said, his voice carrying a strange, tight edge. He walked over, his heavy boots clicking against the concrete. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Volkov," Leo said, trying to stand up, but a sudden wave of dizziness hit him. The room tilted. The strong smell of the bleach mixed with the damp air, and Leo's stomach revolted completely. He didn't even have the strength to run. Leo collapsed to his knees, dry heaving violently over the concrete floor, his body shaking so hard he couldn't catch his breath. In a fraction of a second, Nikolai was there. The Alpha dropped to his knees in the dirt and grime, his massive hands instantly gripping Leo's shoulders, pulling him back against his broad chest. "Leo! What is it? What's wrong?" Nikolai's voice was uncharacteristically panicked, his usual stoic mask completely shattering. "I'm sorry," Leo sobbed, clutching his stomach as another wave of nausea hit him. "I'm sorry, I'll clean it up, I'm just sick." Nikolai didn't listen. The Alpha's instincts, honed by generations of apex biology, suddenly went into overdrive. Nikolai leaned down, burying his face directly into the crook of Leo's neck, taking a massive, desperate breath of the younger man's scent. The faint rain-on-asphalt scent of the beta was gone. In its place was something sweet, intoxicating, and undeniably primal. It was the rich, golden scent of a nesting omega, laced with the unmistakable, milky sweet undertone of a brand-new pregnancy. Nikolai froze. His entire body went rigid as a statue. His pupils dilated until his eyes were pure, terrifying black. "Nikolai?" Leo whispered, terrified by the sudden silence. The Alpha's hands moved from Leo's shoulders down to his midsection. Nikolai's massive, calloused palms spread flat across Leo's lower stomach, pressing gently against the slight, barely noticeable curve beneath the fabric. A low, deep, vibrating purr started in Nikolai's chest, a sound so raw and dominant it made Leo's soul tremble. "You're carrying," Nikolai breathed, his voice a gravelly, possessive snarl that sounded barely human. "My pup. You're carrying my pup." "No, no, that's impossible," Leo stammered, panic flaring as he tried to pull away. "I'm a beta." The doctor said. "Doctors are fools," Nikolai growled, his grip tightening, pulling Leo flush against his body, completely enveloping him. "My wolf knows its own blood. You are an Omega, Leo. My Omega. And you are pregnant." Before Leo could fully process the reality-shattering news, Nikolai looked around the bleak, cold interrogation room. The chains, the concrete, the drains. The Alpha's face twisted into an expression of absolute horror and feral rage, not at Leo, but at the environment. "Dmitri!" Nikolai roared, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with enough force to make the light bulbs rattle. The heavy steel door burst open, and Dmitri ran down, his gun half-drawn. "Boss? What's wrong?" "Get the chains out of here," Nikolai ordered, his voice shaking with a terrifying, protective fury as he swept Leo up into his arms, lifting him effortlessly. "Get the concrete covered. Get carpets, heaters, pillows. If I see a single speck of dust or blood in this basement by tomorrow, I will hang you from the rafters myself. My mate and my child will not be near a cold floor." Dmitri blinked, looking completely bewildered. "Boss, we use this room for..." "Not anymore." Nikolai snarled, his eyes flashing dangerous alpha gold. "Move." Leo, completely overwhelmed by the sudden shift, the revelation, and the sheer intensity of Nikolai's pheromones, buried his face in the Alpha's chest and fainted, leaving the bloodthirsty Mafia boss to aggressively baby-proof his own torture dungeon. When Leo drifted back to consciousness, the first thing he realized was that he wasn't on his thin, lumpy cot in the basement. He was buried beneath a mountain of plush, high-thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets, his head resting on down pillows so soft they felt like clouds. He blinked against the soft, warm light of a crackling fireplace. The room was massive, decorated in deep mahoganies and dark silks, Nikolai's master bedroom. Leo panicked, trying to bolt upright, but a heavy, warm weight across his waist anchored him to the mattress. He gasped, looking down. Nikolai was lying beside him, fully dressed minus his suit jacket, one massive arm thrown possessively over Leo's midsection. The Alpha was asleep, but even in slumber, his brow was furrowed, and his dark scent of winter mint and rich earth completely saturated the air, wrapping around Leo like a heavy, protective blanket. Leo held his breath, trying to slip out from under the heavy arm. The moment he moved an inch, Nikolai's eyes snapped open. The icy blue irises were instantly alert, tracking Leo's movement with predatory focus. "Where do you think you are going?" Nikolai's voice was a rough, gravelly morning rumble. I need to get to work," Leo stammered, his voice small. "The breakfast dishes." "You will never touch a dish in this house again," Nikolai interrupted flatly. He sat up, leaning over Leo, his massive frame effectively blocking out the rest of the room. He reached out, his large, scarred hand gently cupping Leo's cheek. The touch was startlingly tender, a jarring contrast to the dangerous man Leo knew him to be. "You are resting. The doctor is on his way." "Mr. Volkov, please," Leo pleaded, his heart hammering. "This is a mistake. I'm a beta. I can't be what you said. It's biologically impossible." Nikolai's gaze softened, a look of profound, fiercely protective possessiveness taking over his harsh features. "My wolf does not make mistakes, Leo. The secondary gender presentation can be delayed or suppressed by trauma, stress, or medical negligence. Your father's debts, the life you lived, it kept you hidden. But my not woke your true nature." He shifted his hand from Leo's cheek down to his stomach, pressing his palm flat against the fabric of Leo's shirt. A low, rumbling purr vibrated through Nikolai's chest. "You are an Omega. My Omega. And you are carrying the Volkov heir." Leo stared at him, a tear slipping down his cheek. He felt like his entire reality had been ripped away from under his feet. He was a captive, a tool used to pay a debt, and now, he was a vessel for a Mafia boss's child. "What happens to me now?" he whispered. Nikolai leaned down, pressing a firm, lingering kiss to Leo's forehead. "Now, you are protected. You are cherished. And anyone who looks at you the wrong way will find out how quickly I can burn this city to the ground." By the afternoon, the Volkov mansion had descended into absolute, terrified chaos. A team of high-end private obstetricians had been brought in under armed guard. They ran tests, drew blood, and conducted a portable ultrasound. The results were undeniable. Leo possessed a rare, dormant uterine structure common in late-presenting Omegas. And there, on the tiny, grainy black and white screen, was a minuscule, flickering heartbeat. Nikolai had stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes, his jaw clenched so hard Leo thought it might shatter, before he abruptly turned around and ordered the lead doctor to be given $1 million retainer to ensure absolute secrecy and top-tier care. Once the doctors left, the real madness began. Leo stood on the balcony of Nikolai's bedroom, looking down into the courtyard. A fleet of delivery trucks had arrived. Men in tactical gear, the very same enforcers who usually carried assault rifles and guarded drug shipments, were currently carrying massive crates of plush carpets, hypoallergenic pillows, organic air purifiers, and pastel-colored baby furniture. Nikolai was standing in the middle of the courtyard, holding a clipboard, barking orders like a drill sergeant. "Not that one." Nikolai roared at Dmitri, who was sweating through his suit while carrying a massive, incredibly fluffy rug. "I ordered the merino wool. That looks synthetic. If my child's mother trips or gets a rash from that cheap fabric, Dmitri, I will personally throw you into the harbor." "Boss, it's 100% organic wool, I swear." Dmitri squeaked, looking utterly terrified. "The basement is almost done, boss. We put down the subflooring and 3 layers of thermal insulation. The interrogation chairs are in the incinerator." "Good," Nikolai grunted. "And the corners? Did you put the rubber guards on the marble pillars in the main hallway?" "Yes, boss. The whole house is baby-proofed." A toddler could jump out of a window and land on a pile of goose down at this point. Leo watched the scene, utterly bewildered. He pressed his hands against his stomach, where the tiny heartbeat lived. A strange, warm sensation bloomed in his chest. Nikolai Volkov was a monster to the rest of the world, a ruthless, cold-blooded killer. But looking at him now, threatening his top hitman over the softness of a carpet, Leo felt a sudden, inexplicable tug at his heart. The bedroom door opened, and Nikolai stepped inside, carrying a crystal bowl filled with fresh strawberries and a jar of imported clotted cream. The terrifying Mafia boss looked completely soft as he approached the bed, his eyes locked onto Leo. "You should not be standing by the window," Nikolai murmured, setting the bowl down and immediately pulling Leo back into his arms, guiding him gently toward the bed. "The breeze could catch you." "Nikolai, it's 80 degrees outside," Leo said, a tiny, amused smile breaking through his anxiety for the first time. Nikolai paused, his eyes widening slightly at the sound of his name on Leo's lips. A dark, satisfied flush crept up the alpha's neck. He pulled Leo into his lap on the bed, burying his face in Leo's hair, breathing in the sweet, developing Omega scent. "You called me Nikolai," the alpha whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Is that allowed?" Leo asked quietly. "It is required," Nikolai growled softly, his hands rubbing soothing circles into Leo's lower back. "You are not a servant. You are the queen of this house. And it's time everyone treats you like one." The transition from a terrified servant to the most heavily guarded person in the city was dizzying. Leo's days were no longer measured by the number of floors he scrubbed, but by the frequency of his meals, the softness of his silk robes, and the constant, overwhelming presence of Nikolai. The Alpha had moved his primary office entirely into the master suite. A massive mahogany desk now stood across from the fireplace, where Nikolai reviewed multimillion-dollar supply chain logistics while constantly keeping one eye on Leo. "You aren't eating your soup," Nikolai observed, not looking up from a digital ledger. Leo looked down at the bowl of rich bone broth sitting on the tray over his lap. "I'm full, Nikolai. You've fed me 4 times today." Nikolai stood up immediately, the heavy leather of his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, sitting on the edge of the mattress. The heavy, comforting scent of winter mint immediately washed over Leo, easing the tight, anxious knot that had become a permanent resident in his stomach. Nikolai took the silver spoon from Leo's hand, dipped it into the broth, and blew on it gently before holding it to Leo's lips. "The doctor said you need to gain weight. The pup is demanding resources your body wasn't prepared to give. Eat, little bird." Leo swallowed the soup, his cheeks flushing pink. It was impossible to reconcile this deeply attentive man with the Mafia don who had terrified him weeks ago. "You're going to turn me into a completely useless creature," Leo murmured. "I used to run 3 miles a day before my dad, before everything." At the mention of Leo's father, Nikolai's eyes darkened, the temperature in the room seeming to drop instantly. He set the spoon down and placed his massive hand over Leo's stomach, where a faint, soft swell was just beginning to show under the silk. "Your father is dead to us," Nikolai said, his voice flat and absolute. "He has fled the country. He thinks he escaped his debt. He doesn't realize that by leaving you here, he gave me the only treasure I have ever cared to possess." Before Leo could process the intensity of that statement, the heavy oak doors to the bedroom opened. Dmitri stood in the threshold, his expression grim, his hand resting conspicuously near his holster. "Boss," Dmitri said, his voice tight. "The Romano family just struck our eastern transit hub. They're claiming we broke the border agreement. They know about the Omega, boss. They think you're vulnerable." Nikolai didn't flinch. He slowly rose from the bed, his broad shoulders squaring as the terrifying, lethal alpha aura bled back into his posture. The low, protective purr he usually reserved for Leo cut off, replaced by the suffocating pressure of a predator preparing for war. "Vulnerable?" Nikolai echoed, a terrifying, blood-chilling smile spreading across his face. He leaned down, pressing a hard, possessive kiss to Leo's lips, his scent flaring to reassure his nesting mate. Stay in the room, Leo. Guard the door. I am going to remind this city why the Volkov name is written in blood. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the heavily reinforced walls of the estate just past midnight. Leo was huddled in the center of the massive bed, surrounded by a fortress of pillows Nikolai had personally arranged for him. His Omega instincts, newly awakened and incredibly raw, were screaming. Every cell in his body demanded the presence of his alpha. The lack of Nikolai's scent in the room was making him physically ill, the stress causing sharp, terrifying cramps in his lower abdomen. Suddenly, the bedroom doors slammed open. Leo gasped, pulling the duvet up to his chin. Dmitri stepped into the room, his suit jacket torn, a smear of dark blood cutting across his cheek. Sir, we have to move you. A strike team breached the perimeter wall. The boss is holding the courtyard, but I have orders to take you to the secure bunker. The bunker? Leo's voice shook. The basement? It's the safest place in the compound, Dmitri said, stepping forward to help Leo up. But the moment Dmitri reached out toward the bed, a deafening, primal roar echoed from the hallway. Nikolai burst through the doorway like a demonic force of nature. His white shirt was splattered with blood, his tie was gone, and his eyes were glowing a brilliant, terrifying gold. The feral, unhinged power radiating off him was so intense that Dmitri immediately dropped to one knee, baring his neck in absolute, instinctual submission to his pack leader. Nikolai didn't even look at his enforcer. His golden eyes locked onto Leo, who was trembling on the bed. In a fraction of a second, Nikolai crossed the distance, throwing himself onto the bed and wrapping his massive, blood-stained arms around Leo. He buried his face in Leo's neck, inhaling frantically, his chest heaving as he checked for any sign of injury or distress on his mate. Nikolai, you're bleeding, Leo cried, his hands hovering over the alpha's broad back, terrified of hurting him. Not my blood, Nikolai snarled, his voice a ragged, guttural growl. He gripped Leo's hips, pulling him flush against his chest, his scent flaring so violently it was almost suffocating, a toxic, defensive wall of mint and iron designed to mask the Omega from any external threat. They tried to come for you. They thought they could take what is mine. He looked down at Leo's stomach, his large hand trembling as he pressed it against the small bump. The golden glow in his eyes began to soften as he felt the steady, warm life pulsing beneath his palm. A loud, desperate purr tore from his throat, his teeth brushing against the scent gland on Leo's neck, threatening to claim him fully right then and there. Boss, Dmitri whispered from the floor, still keeping his head down. The perimeter is secure. The Romano strike team has been eliminated. Double the guards, Nikolai ordered, not taking his eyes off Leo. Bring the medical team up to check him. If his blood pressure has spiked even a fraction because of this, I will personally execute every remaining Romano member by sunrise. Leo reached up, his small hands cupping the Mafia boss's harsh, blood-flecked jaw, forcing Nikolai to look at him. I'm okay, Leo whispered, his heart swelling with a strange, terrifying affection for the monster holding him. The baby is okay. Just stay with me. Please. Nikolai froze, the last of his feral rage melting away at the soft touch. He collapsed against Leo, burying his face in the crook of his neck, holding his fragile beta-turned Omega as if he were the only solid thing left in a world of violence. The aftermath of the Romano attack left the Volkov estate under an ironclad lockdown. But inside the master suite, the atmosphere had shifted into something entirely different. Nikolai's primal alpha instincts, pushed to the absolute brink by the threat to his pregnant mate, refused to de-escalate. He hadn't left Leo's side in 48 hours. He didn't wear his suits anymore, he walked around the expansive bedroom in loose, dark sweatpants and soft cotton t-shirts, his hair uncombed, looking like a beautifully rumpled, lethal mountain of a man. Nikolai, I need to go to the bathroom, Leo sighed, shifting beneath the heavy duvet. Nikolai, who had been sitting on the edge of the bed staring intently at Leo's abdomen, instantly grew rigid. I will carry you. I can walk 5 steps, Nikolai. My legs still work. The floors are hardwood, Leo. They are cold. What if you slip? What if the sudden change in temperature shocks the pup? Nikolai's voice was deadpan, completely serious. The bloodthirsty Mafia don who ruled the city with a fist of iron was genuinely, terrifyingly earnest about the floor temperature. Before Leo could protest, Nikolai scooped him up, silk robe and all, cradling him against his massive chest. Leo sighed, letting his head rest against Nikolai's shoulder. He was starting to realize that arguing with a nesting alpha was a losing battle. As they moved across the room, Leo noticed a massive pile of clothes accumulating in the large, walk-in closet. It wasn't just any clothes, it was a mountain of Nikolai's personal, heavily scented sweaters, flannel shirts, and soft blankets, all meticulously arranged into a circular, bowl-like shape on the floor. Leo blinked. Nikolai, what is that? Nikolai paused, a faint, dark flush creeping up his neck. He looked away, clearing his throat. It is a nest. Did you build me a nest? Leo asked, his heart doing a strange, fluttering flip. In Omega biology, the Omega usually built the nest. But when an Omega was a late presenter and stressed, a devoted Alpha would often build one to give their mate a sense of absolute security. You were stressed, Nikolai muttered, his voice dropping to a low rumble as he carefully set Leo down on the bathroom counter. Your scent was sour from the adrenaline after the attack. My wolf couldn't rest until I built a proper place for you to hide. If you don't like it, I can burn it and start over. I love it, Leo interrupted softly, reaching out to wrap his arms around Nikolai's neck. He pulled the massive alpha closer, burying his face in the crook of Nikolai's neck, inhaling the deep, soothing wintermint scent. Thank you. Nikolai stiffened for a fraction of a second before his massive arms wrapped around Leo, holding him so tight it practically squeezed the breath from his lungs. A deep, thrumming purr started in the alpha's chest, vibrating right into Leo's bones, melting away the last remnants of his fear. By the 5th month of the pregnancy, Leo's transformation into a true Omega was complete. His hips had softened, his skin carried a radiant, milky glow, and his stomach was now a beautiful, round bump that Nikolai was entirely obsessed with. The basement interrogation room had been completely converted. It was no longer a place of horror, it was now a state-of-the-art, soundproof, subterranean sanctuary. The concrete walls were covered in thick, plush velvet padding, the floors were layered with 3 inches of heated merino wool carpets, and a massive, custom-built bed sat in the center, filled with the nest Nikolai kept perfectly maintained. It was the safest room in North America. Leo was currently sitting in the middle of the basement nest, wearing one of Nikolai's oversized cashmere sweaters, eating a bowl of cold peaches. The heavy steel door, now painted a soft, calming cream color, opened, and Nikolai stepped inside. The alpha looked exhausted, a faint shadow of stubble darkening his jaw, but the moment his icy blue eyes locked onto Leo, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by a gaze of pure, unadulterated adoration. He stripped off his outer shirt, tossing it aside, and slid into the nest on his hands and knees. He approached Leo like a giant, worshipful predator, leaning down to press his forehead against Leo's round belly. The Pack Council met today, Nikolai murmured, his voice vibrating against Leo's skin. They questioned the legitimacy of a beta carrying the Volkov heir. They thought I was weak for staying inside the compound for so long. Leo's hand paused over his peach bowl. A sudden spike of anxiety hit him. What did you do? Nikolai looked up, a dark, dangerously smug smile curving his lips. I brought the medical records. And then I reminded them that anyone who speaks of my maid as anything less than the matriarch of this family will be fed to the dogs. 2 of the old council members are currently looking for new employment. The rest swore a blood oath to you and the pup. Leo stared at him, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of Nikolai's possessiveness. Nikolai, you didn't have to do that. I'm just a civilian. I'm just the boy whose dad owed you money. You are my mate, Nikolai growled softly, his golden alpha eyes flaring to life. He crawled upward, pinning Leo gently beneath his massive frame, his hands gripping Leo's wrists and pinning them to the soft pillows. "Look at me, Leo." Leo looked up, his breath hitching. "There is no more debt," Nikolai whispered, his thumb tracing Leo's bottom lip. "There is no more captive and captor. I am yours, and you are mine. But I have not marked you yet. I wanted to wait until you were ready. Until you knew, without a doubt, that I love you." The word love echoed in the quiet room, heavy and profound. Leo looked into the eyes of the man who had kidnapped him, who had terrified him, but who had also rebuilt his entire world to keep him safe, who purred like a kitten whenever they touched, and who loved their unborn child with a feral intensity. Leo released his wrists from Nikolai's grip and wrapped his arms around the alpha's neck, tilting his head back to expose the unblemished scent gland on his neck. "Mark me," Leo whispered, tears of absolute surrender stinging his eyes. "Make me yours, Nikolai." With a low, possessive growl, Nikolai leaned down. His elongated alpha fangs scraped against Leo's sensitive skin for an agonizing, beautiful second before he bit down, sinking his teeth deep into the gland. A burst of pure, golden euphoria exploded through Leo's veins. The mating bond snapped into place like a steel lock, tying their souls, their emotions, and their biology together forever. Nikolai groaned into the bite, his scent flaring into a triumphant, world-conquering roar of mint and earth as he claimed his unexpected, beautiful Omega for eternity. The mating mark changed everything. The raw, jagged bond hummed in Leo's veins, a constant, glowing presence that anchored him completely to Nikolai. If the alpha had been protective before the bite, he was borderline unhinged now. The final months of Leo's pregnancy turned the Volkov estate into a fortress of contradictions, half heavily armed military compound, half ultra-luxurious wellness retreat. Leo sat in the middle of a massive, custom-built velvet nest in the center of the master bedroom, propped up by a dozen silk pillows. His belly was a massive, heavy sphere now, low and prominent beneath one of Nikolai's oversized cashmere sweaters. He was currently trying to read a book, but it was difficult to concentrate with a 6'4" Russian Mafia don vacuuming the baseboards 2 feet away. Nikolai had completely discarded his bespoke charcoal suits. He wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched tightly over his broad shoulders and dark sweatpants, a pair of industrial-grade noise-canceling headphones pushed around his neck. He was operating a high-end, medical-grade HEPA vacuum with a look of intense, lethal concentration usually reserved for planning hits. "Nikolai," Leo said, his voice soft but clear. The vacuum cut off instantly. Nikolai dropped the handle, crossing the room in 2 massive, silent strides. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his face immediately dropping near Leo's belly. He pressed his broad palm against the fabric, his nostrils flaring as he took in Leo's scent. "Is it a contraction? Are you in pain?" Nikolai's icy blue eyes were wide, flashing with a sudden, panicked gold. "Dmitri is downstairs with the medical team. I will call them." "Nikolai, I'm fine," Leo laughed gently, reaching out to run his fingers through the alpha's thick, dark hair, untangling the silver-dusted strands at his temples. "The air is clean. You vacuumed 3 times today. The machine is going to melt." Nikolai frowned, though his chest rumbled with a low, instinctual purr as Leo's fingers massaged his scalp. "The doctor said dust mites can trigger early labor or cause respiratory inflammation in the 3rd trimester. I am not taking risks with my mate or my pup." "You threat-assessed dust," Leo murmured, an affectionate smile breaking across his face. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against Nikolai's. The heavy, intoxicating scent of winter mint and rich earth washed over him, instantly easing the dull, constant ache in his lower back. "I threat-assess everything," Nikolai growled softly, his hand moving in slow, soothing circles over the tight curve of Leo's stomach. Suddenly, a distinct, violent thump hit the palm of his hand. The baby had kicked, hard enough to shift the fabric of the sweater. Nikolai froze, his jaw tightening as his eyes softened into a look of pure, unadulterated adoration. He leaned lower, pressing his lips directly against the center of Leo's belly, breathing a soft, rumbling command against the skin. Grow strong, little one. Your father is waiting. The tenderness was dizzying. Leo leaned back into the pillows, his heart swelling so fast it felt painful. He looked around the room, at the rubber-padded corners of the heavy mahogany furniture, at the absolute safety Nikolai had built around him. His father had left him here as a broken piece of collateral, a human shield to cover a debt. But in the arms of the monster who ruled the city, Leo had found a strange, beautiful sanctuary. The heavy oak doors opened, and Dmitri stepped into the entryway, stopping exactly where the newly installed plush carpeting began. He looked exhausted, his tie slightly askew, holding a gold-leafed invitation. "Boss," Dmitri said, keeping his eyes firmly on the floor to avoid challenging the nesting alpha. "The Romano family has called for a sit-down at the neutral territory downtown. Old man Romano wants to negotiate a permanent border treaty. He says, he wants to put an end to the blood feud before the winter snows hit." Nikolai didn't stand up immediately. He stayed on his knees, his hand remaining possessively over Leo's stomach, his scent shifting from the soft, domestic mint into a sharp, icy chill that made the air in the room feel thin. "Neutral territory," Nikolai echoed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. "He thinks I will leave my estate while my maid is weeks away from delivery. He offered his own grandchildren as hostages for the duration of the meeting to guarantee safety, boss," Dmitri added quietly. "If we refuse, the Pact Council will look at it as a sign of weakness. They'll think the Omega has made you soft." Leo reached down, his small hand gripping Nikolai's shoulder. He felt the massive muscles beneath his palms tense like coiled steel. "Nikolai," Leo whispered. "If this ends the war, you have to go. For the baby. I don't want our child growing up in a house where guns are drawn in the courtyard every week." Nikolai turned his head, looking up at Leo. The conflict in his blue eyes was agonizing. His primal instincts demanded he stay inside the nest, guarding the perimeter with his bare teeth. But the rational, lethal tactician knew that a permanent peace would guarantee his family's safety forever. He stood up slowly, the towering, terrifying Mafia dawn returning in a single breath. He leaned down, catching Leo's jaw in a firm, deeply possessive kiss that tasted of absolute promise. "I will go," Nikolai murmured against Leo's lips, his scent flaring to leave a heavy, protective marker on his mate. "But I am taking half the garrison with me. And if a single shadow moves across this property while I am gone, Dmitri knows exactly what to do." The silence of the estate after Nikolai's departure was deafening. Even with dozens of heavily armed guards patrolling the outer walls and the medical team stationed in the eastern wing, Leo felt exposed. Without the constant, thrumming purr of his alpha, his Omega biology felt raw, his skin hypersensitive to every creak of the old mansion. By midnight, the weather turned. A violent thunderstorm rolled over the city, heavy rain lashing against the reinforced glass windows of the master bedroom. Leo tossed and turned in the nest, his stomach tight, a strange, rhythmic pressure building in his lower abdomen. Just Braxton Hicks, he told himself, breathing heavily as he clutched a flannel shirt that smelled strongly of Nikolai's winter mint. "It's just the stress. The baby isn't due for another 2 weeks." A sudden, sharp pain flared through his pelvis, so intense it ripped a choked whine from his throat. Leo gasped, his hands flying to his stomach. Beneath his palms, the muscle was rock hard. A second later, a warm, terrifying rush of fluid soaked through his sweatpants and into the layers of the nest. His water had broken. Panic, cold and absolute, took hold. He reached for the bedside radio to call the medical team, but before his fingers could touch the buttons, the lights in the mansion flickered once, twice, and died completely. The room plunged into pitch blackness. A heartbeat later, the low, mechanical whine of the backup generators failed to kick in. Leo froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence of the house was broken by the muffled, distant sound of suppressed gunfire from the courtyard below. The Romanos hadn't called a sit-down to negotiate. It was a decoy to draw Nikolai away from the fortress, leaving the prize vulnerable. The bedroom door burst open. Leo flinched, pulling the heavy duvet up, but the distinct scent of ozone and sweat identified the intruder before he could scream. Leo! Get up! Dimitri's voice was ragged. He didn't have his jacket on, and a heavy tactical rifle was slung across his chest. He held a high-powered flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the pale, sweat-slicked look on Leo's face. The perimeter is breached. They cut the primary power lines and jammed the generator fuel pumps. We have to move you right now. Dimitri, Leo gasped, his body curling inward as another massive contraction ripped through him. I can't. The baby. It's coming now. Dimitri's flashlight beam dropped to the wet sheets of the nest. The hardened enforcer, a man who had survived 3 separate turf wars without blinking, looked visibly horrified. Holy hell. Now. Like, right now. Yes, right now. Leo sobbed, tears cutting through the sweat on his cheeks. Where is Nikolai? Have you called him? The comms are jammed, but the boss has a biometric tracker linked to your heart rate. The second your pulse spiked, his phone would have alerted him. He's coming back, Leo, but we have to buy him time. We're going to the cellar vault. It's the only room with a reinforced steel door and an independent ventilation line. Dimitri didn't wait for permission. He slung his rifle to his back, scooped Leo up from the ruined nest, and ran out into the dark hallway. The journey down to the basement was a nightmare of shadows and sound. The distant pops of gunfire echoed through the stairwells. Leo kept his face buried in Dimitri's shoulder, his entire body shaking as the contractions grew closer, coming every 3 minutes. His internal Omega bond was screaming, reaching out into the void for an alpha who was miles away. They reached the heavy steel door of the converted interrogation room. Dimitri punched in the manual code, the thick locking bolts sliding back with a heavy, metallic clunk. He pushed Leo inside, setting him down gently on the massive, velvet-lined bed in the center of the room. The vault was pitch black, but it was warm. The triple-layer thermal insulation Nikolai had insisted on installing weeks ago was doing its job, keeping the damp chill of the basement out. I'm locking the door from the inside, Dimitri said, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps as he stood by the control panel. Nothing short of an anti-tank missile is getting through this steel. The medical team is dead or scattered, Leo. It's just you and me. Leo collapsed against the plush pillows, his body racked by a fresh wave of pain that made him scream. He clutched his stomach, his mind spinning in the dark. He was locked in a torture basement, surrounded by velvet and silk, about to give birth to a Mafia heir while a war raged outside. Dimitri, Leo wept, his fingers tearing at the cashmere of his sweater. Find him. Please, tell Nikolai to come home. The steel walls of the vault hummed with a terrifying resonance. Outside, the muffled thuds of explosions rattled the concrete foundations of the Volkov estate, but inside, the air was thick, suffocating, and heavy with the scent of an Omega in labor. Leo lay in the center of the plush, velvet-lined bed, his body slick with sweat. His fingers were dug so deeply into the merino wool of the mattress that his nails were bleeding. Another contraction slammed into him, a brutal, tearing tide that forced a ragged, guttural scream from his throat. Push, Leo. You've got to push. Dimitri yelled, his voice cracking with a panic that no cartel ambush had ever managed to induce. The massive, scar-faced enforcer had thrown his tactical rifle onto the floor. He was on his knees at the foot of the bed, his huge, calloused hands shaking violently as he tried to figure out how to assist a male Omega giving birth. I don't know what I'm looking at, man. The boss is going to skin me alive if I mess this up. I can't. Leo sobbed, his head thrashing against the pillows. The darkness of the room, lit only by Dimitri's flickering tactical flashlight, felt like a tomb. His internal bond was a raw, agonizing ache, crying out into the void for the one person who could anchor him. Nikolai, where is he? Dmitri, it hurts so bad. Suddenly, a sound cut through the chaos. It wasn't the sound of gunfire. It was a deep, vibrating, mechanical groan from the ceiling above. The heavy steel door of the vault, engineered to withstand military-grade breaches, shook violently. Someone was on the other side, throwing their entire physical weight against the locking mechanism. Dmitri scrambled for his rifle, his face turning pale as he pointed the barrel at the door. They're at the vault. If they cut through the hinges. The steel didn't melt. It tore. With a deafening, metallic shriek, the manual locking bolts were sheared completely off their tracks by a force that didn't belong to a human. The massive door slammed outward, hitting the concrete wall with a force that sent a cloud of dust into the air. Standing in the threshold, framed by the dim, red emergency lights of the hallway, was Nikolai Volkov. He didn't look like a man. He looked like an apex predator straight out of a nightmare. His clothes were shredded, soaked through with dark, steaming blood that wasn't his own. His skin was pale, his veins stark black beneath his flesh from the sheer volume of adrenaline pumping through his system. But it was his eyes that made Dmitri instantly drop to his knees in terror. They were glowing a brilliant, blinding, feral gold. Nikolai had run through a war zone, torn through an invading strike team with his bare hands, and broken through his own security layout because his biometric tracker had told him his mate's heart was failing. The moment Nikolai's golden eyes locked onto Leo, the terrifying, murderous aura shattered. A desperate, choked sound tore from the Alpha's throat. He dropped his weapon, crossing the room in a single, blurring leap, throwing himself onto the bed beside Leo. Leo! Leo, I'm here! Nikolai roared softly, his massive arms wrapping around Leo's upper body, pulling him instantly into his chest. The moment Nikolai's scent hit the room, a massive, explosive wave of winter mint, heavy wood, and fierce, protective dominance, Leo's entire body went lax. The agonizing, jagged tension in his pelvis relaxed just enough for him to draw a massive, shuddering breath. The bond snapped taut, flooding Leo's nervous system with a natural, euphoric pain relief that only a true alpha could provide. Nikolai, Leo wept, burying his face in the blood-stained collar of the alpha's shirt. The baby, it's coming. It wouldn't come without you. I am here, my love. I am here, Nikolai whispered frantically, his voice trembling as he buried his face in Leo's neck, his teeth gently grazing the mating mark to flood him with soothing pheromones. He looked down at Leo's rounded belly, his hand shaking as he pressed it against the tight skin. A deep, thrumming, world-shaking purr erupted from Nikolai's chest, vibrating straight into the mattress. He looked up at Dmitri, his eyes flashing a warning that made the enforcer freeze. Get out. Secure the perimeter. If anyone touches this door, kill them. Yes, boss, Dmitri squeaked, scrambling out of the room like his life depended on it, pulling the broken steel door shut behind him as best he could. Nikolai turned back to Leo, his expression shifting into something incredibly soft, worshipful, and fierce. He stripped off his bloody shirt, throwing it away so his bare skin could press against Leo's. He gripped Leo's hands, locking their fingers together. Together, Leo, Nikolai growled softly, his golden eyes anchoring Leo's gaze. Push for me, little bird. Bring our pup into the world. With a final, desperate cry, backed by the absolute safety of his alpha's arms, Leo pushed. 6 months later, the basement of the Volkov estate was silent once more. But it was a warm, living silence. The plush velvet padding remained on the walls, and the 3 inches of heated merino wool carpet still covered the floor, but the interrogation grates and chains were a distant memory. Now, the center of the underground sanctuary was occupied by a massive, beautifully carved wooden crib, surrounded by a mountain of plush toys and organic cotton blankets. Leo sat on the edge of the massive bed, his skin radiant, completely recovered from the ordeal of the birth. He was wearing a soft cashmere robe, looking down at the small, chubby bundle nestled in his arms. Alexander Volkov. A healthy, beautiful baby boy who carried his father's thick, dark hair and his mother's soft, quiet gray eyes. The baby was currently sleeping, his tiny fist gripping the collar of Leo's robe, blowing tiny milk bubbles as he breathed. The door to the sanctuary opened quietly. Nikolai stepped into the room. The terrifying Mafia Don who had executed the entire leadership of the Romano family in a single night was currently carrying a tiny, silver-plated baby bottle and a fresh organic diaper. He had his sleeves rolled up, his broad forearms looking ridiculous against the pastel colors of the baby supplies. "Is he asleep?" Nikolai whispered, his deep voice dropping to a low, rumbling register that always made the baby smile in his sleep. "Just dropped off," Leo smiled, tilting his head back as Nikolai approached the bed. Nikolai leaned down, pressing a warm, lingering kiss to Leo's lips, tasting of sweet mint. He then slid into the nest behind Leo, wrapping his massive, scarred arms around Leo's waist, pulling both his mate and his child back against his chest. His chin rested on Leo's shoulder, his nostrils flaring as he took a deep, deeply satisfied breath of their combined scents. The rain-on-asphalt scent of the beta was completely gone, replaced by the rich, golden, milky sweetness of a fulfilled Omega matriarch. "The Pack Council finalized the new borders today," Nikolai murmured, his thumb brushing over the soft skin of Leo's wrist. "The Romano territory has been fully absorbed. The city is quiet. There is no one left who would dare look at this house with anything but reverence." Leo leaned back into the solid, unyielding heat of his alpha's body. He looked down at their son, then up at the man who had once held him as collateral for a deadbeat father's sins. "You really did baby-proof the entire empire, didn't you?" Leo teased gently, a soft laugh bubbling in his chest. Nikolai's grip tightened around him, a deep, thrumming purr starting up in his chest, vibrating through Leo's back and into the baby, who cooed softly in his sleep. "I told you, Leo," Nikolai growled softly, his lips brushing against the mating mark on Leo's neck. "You are the only quiet thing in my life. I will burn the world to keep you safe. You and the pup are my only debt now, and I intend to spend the rest of my life paying it." Leo closed his eyes, completely enveloped by the scent of winter mint and the absolute, ironclad safety of the beast who loved him. The extortion baby had given him a family, a true nature, and a love that was entirely, beautifully unbreakable.
Thank you for watching, dear darlings. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel for more such story.